Jay Grymes is retiring. People will do anything to get away from Johnny Asian. Kind of kidding. We'll give the weatherman his flowers. Roll it, Kirk. Well, he's straight from Arlington, Virginia, went to school at the University of Delaware, descended upon the great state of Louisiana in 1985, came to work for Louisiana State University, joined WAFB in 1996, and 21 years ago was named Chief Meteorologist here at the big station. Ladies and gentlemen, Jay Grymes, who since he announced his retirement for some reason just cannot stop smiling.
Well, you hit on it right there. I'm getting away from Johnny. There's number one.
That's exactly right. So let's talk about growing up in Arlington, Virginia. That's southern enough, but it's upper East Coast enough too. What about that?
Right. So Arlington basically is Washington D.C.
Yeah.
So that's where I was from early days. My father got transferred to Wilmington, Delaware. So that's where I grew up.
Yeah.
East Coaster, Wilmington for folks out there, that's basically a suburb of Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school up there, 10 years in and out of the University of Delaware. Actually, a lot of people don't know this. My undergraduate degree is biology.
Yeah.
Then went back to graduate school for climate science. I was doing some work with some insects, and LSU, the entomologist down here, invited me down. And when I came down here, I was thinking 3 and out.
Yeah.
I was also
so much for that.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. It was that first winter. First winter here, I said, okay, I got to figure out a way to stay. LSU comes up with a great offer to let me go full time, and then it just snowballed from there. Get a phone call from one of the distant news directors here, Liz Golson.
Yeah.
Started weekends, and that's how it went.
Now, you weren't like a lot of my friends from the East Coast who are like winter snobs down here who look down on us complaining about 35-degree temperatures when y'all had teens where you came from, right?
Well, when I was teaching in those early days, the students made fun of me because your winters were just fantastic, and so I'm in shorts still because it's 65 in the afternoon, and I'm used to 35.
Right,
so, but I have been here long enough now, more than half my life in Louisiana. Yeah, so now I'm like everybody else. In fact, I'm old enough now that I can even have cowboy boots.
Well, we both do, brother. We have that
indeed.
in common. So let's talk about weather. When did your affection for science begin?
The science thing goes, back into early school, but the weather thing really kind of evolved mainly in undergraduate and graduate school. And the thing was that my focus in biology was environmental biology, and in doing that, it was intriguing that everything pointed to where's the water. Mm-hmm. From an environmental biology standpoint. So I went back to graduate school really kind of looking at water resources, hydroclimatology. And then because I was a biologist by training, the research I did for my master's degree was looking at biological responses to climatological variability. Mm-hmm. And it was, like I said, the insects. I actually was doing some tinkering with some insects, and there was a program down here looking at a soybean pest.
Yeah.
So I came down here and worked on that for a year. But the migration from climate impacts, which was what I was really trained to do initially, into weather forecasting was a long, protracted one that was mainly motivated by the phone call to come to work here.
So it's interesting, you come to work to be an academician at LSU, and then you end up on television talking about the weather. How'd that happen?
Well, one of the things I told my students over the years is it's great to have goals. Mm-hmm. And my goal was to finish a PhD, which I didn't. But my goal also was to be a climate scientist. But you need to also make sure you don't put the blinkers on.
Right.
And this door opened that I thought would be kind of opened and closed pretty quickly. And it opened, and it ended up being a pathway to a whole new career. So here I am 28 years later at Channel 9 and getting ready to shift gears again.
I know. So, we're going to take a quick break and come back with Jay and talk about his time here at WAFB, moving around Baton Rouge. He and I have had conversations about what it's like to be in the community because people run into him. Sometimes I prank him to call him to ask him, hey, what's the weather going to be like? What's the weather going to be like? Just to get his classic responses, many of which I can't share with you here on the air. More with Jay Grymes in just a moment. So after about 28 years here at the big station, Jay Grymes is finally going to be getting away from old Johnny Asian and being able to enjoy his mornings, evenings, and afternoons here in South Louisiana. When you got here in '96, how long did it take you to realize how important weather is to those of us who live here?
That's a great question, because when I first started this, and agreed to do TV. Now, I understand, folks out there, that I had no background in this business, none whatsoever. But I thought, okay, I'm going to be on the weekends. I'm going to be invisible. And so I just thought, okay, this is a sidebar, a paycheck that'll help me out at home. And, they didn't tell me at the time that the Sunday night show was the most watched show of the week. Truth is, Clay, if I'd have known that, I probably would have said pass.
Really?
Yeah, because I really, even now, almost 30 years later, this is still not a comfort zone for me. I just don't have the DNA for this. And I look at other people in my business, in my station right here, and I'll highlight the three, Dr. Steve, Jared, and Jeff, and they just are, they love the camera and the camera loves them. For me, this is really work. And it's the three, I tell people, it's the three toughest minutes of my day. But I've sort of learned a way to get around that, but I'm at 150 beats a minute in front of that green screen. And so
why is that?
Why, because it's just not a comfort zone. I'm not comfortable being on the camera, and I'm also not comfortable with this little device right here, where somebody in the back is yelling at me, rap, rap, rap.
That's exactly right.
So there was a growing window there, but it very quickly became apparent to me that even the people that pretend they don't care about weather down here really do.
Who pretends they don't care about the weather?
Well, weather's not all that important. Then you go into their house, and this was years back, but you stop by their house, and back in the den, what's on the TV? The Weather Channel.
Of course.
Nobody's in there.
Right.
So the Weather Channel became sort of video muzak at the time. And what I've come to learn over the years is that I think people down here are even more sensitive to weather on a day-to-day basis than where I grew up. And in fact, when going to schools, I would often ask the youngsters, name something that's not impacted by weather. And even adults kind of go, well, yeah, there's lots of things like, well, wait a minute, everything I do is impacted by weather.
Yep.
Mom's decision to go to the grocery store is dependent on what's going on outside. So weather is really a big, big part of our daily lives.
Stylistically, the difference between you and Mike Graham, because Mike had been in that spot for so long and then you came in, but the interesting thing about your style is it was so scientific and it was like you who's this guy, but he knows what the hell he's talking about. And so that works for us here because, we had Andrew in 1992. You get here 4 years later. So, people were still kind of, it was something we talked about.
Right.
Let's fast forward to '03. You're named chief meteorologist. What was your mindset when you knew you were going to be in that top spot?
Well, it certainly going from part-time to full-time first chair was a big leap. It's not something that happens very, very many places. But I felt comfortable with it because I'd had that opportunity to work with Mike and with Diane Deaton. And they'd given me, at that point, it was coming up on about 7 years of, we called it part-time, but I was working 180 days, sometimes 200 days a year. So it was really more than part-time. I had felt a sense that the audience out there had sort of bypassed, ignored my foibles, and gave me some credit for understanding the weather.
No, you bamboozled us. We accepted you.
There you go. And isn't that what it's all about?
Right.
It's just flash and mirrors. So, and then I also had this real advantage. You'd mentioned Mike, who was, the GOAT at the time, and the other GOAT was Pat.
Yeah.
But their two styles were polar opposites.
Oh no, Pat was a jokester. I mean, and Mike Graham was the straight man.
Right.
And so it was so interesting between the two of them.
And it gave me a Grand Canyon to fall into, because I couldn't be Mike, but I never could have been Pat either.
No.
So I had that opportunity to kind of find my way, and that's exactly how it happened. And for whatever reason, people seemed to appreciate what I was doing. And I think partly that was because no matter how good or bad I was on a day-to-day basis, I think they knew I was pretty sincere.
Yeah.
Because I'm giving the forecast to my family, to my wife.
Sure.
And ultimately, those people became my family.
I want to talk about, you take over the job in 2003. The next 5 years was really a game-changing period for weather here in Louisiana. So we'll come back and talk with Jay about 2005, 2008, and everything that followed. And later in the show, Dr. Steve, who's taken over the big chair, and he actually is going to be taking over that parking spot he just learned about in a moment. We'll talk about that later on. It was Monday, August 29th, 2005, and a lot of things in Louisiana changed then, and this fellow you see on the screen was there with us through it all, and that was Hurricane Katrina, which was the first of 3 hurricanes we had in succession during that cycle. Andrew had been so long ago, many people either weren't here or some people weren't born, didn't know how bad it was, but Katrina was a game changer. Tell me about that weekend leading up to that storm.
Well, professionally, it was a game changer for me, too. I mean, I'd done a couple of years in the first chair there, but when Katrina hit, and back then it was Steve and Diane and I believe, and even when NHC was still pointing it at Florida, we had a real uneasy feeling.
Yeah.
And it eventually evolved into kind of the storm event that took me to the next level, and not in terms of how the audience saw me so much as how I understood how to deliver information.
Yeah.
So we see it coming. We realized that this could be more than catastrophic, and of course what it did to New Orleans is still, I mean, I still can't wrap my head around the fact that 1,600 people.
Yeah.
It's the United States.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
But that, in fact, during that event, I was on air straight, same shirt that you saw there, 32 straight hours. And a lot of it was just adrenaline.
Yeah.
And so that set the bar. I think we did a marvelous job,
no doubt,
news and weather in terms of handling it. Of course, and remember that some of the New Orleans stations were coming up here. Yeah.
I remember the reporter from the CBS, from the network, was here watching one of your weather hits, and he was just talking about how enamored he was with what you were doing. I remember that Friday morning, I was still doing radio at the time, and I had a conversation with someone from the National Hurricane Center, and I don't remember his name, but he said, oh, this thing is going to hop Florida and go up along the East Coast. And I just didn't think much about it. And then that next day, this Saturday morning, I get a call from Ed Buggs. And Ed, Clay, are you watching the news? Saturday morning, Buggs.
Yep.
No. And then he told me to turn it on, and I turned it on, and I saw Governor Blanco and Mayor Nagin at the time talking about this storm. It was catastrophic for a lot of people, and some will say New Orleans has never fully recovered from it.
I think that's true, yeah.
So you go forward to 2008, and then Baton Rouge gets slammed with Gustav. How were those two events different for you?
Well, let's remember in between there, I mean, in 05, don't forget, a month later after Katrina, then Western Louisiana gets it with Rita.
Yeah.
So the whole sort of way that tropical weather was pitched to South Louisiana changed in that one season.
Yeah.
So when Gustav and also Ike in 2008, when those came here, two things I remember is that people were much more aware ahead of time. And then the threat of those two storms and the impact of Gustav here changed the bar again, because Gustav really was more destructive in the Baton Rouge metro area by far than Katrina was.
Yeah.
So that was another event, and again, working with Steve and Diane then, we had this, I think we, at that point, kind of had our rhythm together. And again, I think we did a pretty decent job, particularly with handling some of the big rains just to the east of the capital city.
Well, look, Alyssa, we'll get out of this segment early. I want to bring Dr. Steve Caparata in for the next segment to talk about working with Jay and what he's going to do with this whole thing going forward. We'll do that next. You know, if you weren't here, you really can't understand how traumatic that scene is for people who live in Baton Rouge and in East Baton Rouge Parish. That's the Great Flood of 2016. And I'm sitting here now with Jay Grymes and Dr. Steve Caparata. I mean, hurricanes are one thing. You have a few days to anticipate whatever is going to happen. This spun up on us in a matter of hours. And then here we have this 1,000-year flood. From your perspective, when did you, the both of you, start realizing, hey, this is different?
You know, it was, for me, it was, I think I heard Jay mention a little bit about this earlier, some of the neighborhoods you started hearing, Baton Rouge, started hearing about, you know, the water was there. I remember being in here and seeing water rescues happening in Baton Rouge. And just never thought I'd really see that happening. I'd been to New Orleans for Katrina, post-Katrina, you know. You always knew that potential was there in New Orleans. Just never expected to see that here.
Yeah.
Well, it was the same thing, and I was getting calls the night that the rains really started to kick in. It was before the rescues had started, but it was at a point where people are calling me from areas of Metro Baton Rouge, and I'm thinking, how do you have water in your yard?
Yeah.
And you know, the numbers were adding up, but there wasn't any period where there was, you know, like 4 inches in an hour.
Yeah.
It was just a steady rain for a protracted number of hours. And down here, it's so flat, there was no place for the water to go. But I never, in my wildest dreams, would have imagined how bad it was going to get.
I mean, it was just 8 feet of water, like on Winborn Avenue. And so you get through this. This is a Friday through, I guess, a part of Sunday. The rain stops, and then it was immediately sunny, and then you have what's left behind. How do you guys transition then when the weather isn't really the factor because it was warm and sunny, but there was devastation all over our city? How did you transition in that?
Well, one of the things we were still doing is even when the rain stopped, the rivers were still rising.
Yeah.
So we were trying to get across to people that the worst isn't over yet.
Yeah.
We've got another day probably of rise to go. And you mentioned if you weren't here, you just can't get it. There's no way to describe that event. And I think for me, it was just a matter of getting more and more people in the community experiencing the unthinkable. And then I had the opportunity, I think Steve did too, where EBR and Ascension Parish Sheriff's Office took me out to look at
go see it.
the impacts. And you know, one thing about floods like that, pictures don't tell you the story. Yeah, and I say this, and I don't mean to be smart alecky about it, but you have to smell it.
I was thinking that when you said that because I had a chance to move around the city, and it was bad.
And even as the water's beginning to slowly recede, and it was painfully slow. You just realized, you know, I still even this. Here we are so many years later, and it's still, I struggle to come up with the words to explain it because it was just so incredibly impactful. And for people that absolutely had no expectation of an event like that.
So I asked Jay earlier about the transition from Mike to him as the chief meteorologist, and here we are now, and it's imminent that you're going to be the chief meteorologist here. Just go on and tell everybody how mean he's been to you in the last few weeks.
Well, we'll save that for the podcast, right?
That's right.
Look, I'm really thankful for this opportunity. One of the things I pointed out, Clay, you know, in 45 years, there's only been 2 chiefs here between Mike and Jay. This community's been really fortunate to have people like that leading the helm, that stability too, that familiar face that you know you can trust. So just really thankful. But I'm so appreciative of Jay too. I told him this. You know, he doesn't like the flowers and the bouquets.
He doesn't. Part of this it tickles me because I know he hates that, but that's okay.
But he really coached me along, you know, when I got to Baton Rouge. And one of the things that I'm so appreciative of was he really encouraged me to go to grad school in my early days here. And, you know, here's all these years later. I'm really, you know, that was him that pushed me to get that done. So that's just one thing.
There's a
kind words. I left my wallet on the desk.
That's right.
I'll get it later.
Right. Look, there is such a love affair here with information about weather. You heard us talking about it earlier. I mean, people really want to know because the weather impacts traffic, and traffic impacts how our days move. What's your plan on engaging with the audience even further? Because you're doing it every morning. I see every morning. But what's your plan now that you'll be managing this division of WAFB?
I think in 2024, it's a lot about the digital side, right?
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of that. I've been doing more on TikTok recently, which is kind of tough for an old guy like me to do, but here we are. So I think that's going to be a big move that way.
What's the thing you're going to miss the most?
I think I'm going to miss the ability to interact with the public. Like I told you before, I'm not going to miss the camera, not one minute. But I am going to miss the ability to sort of help people beyond simply partly cloudy, chance of rain. But what I do want to say is this is the right move at the right time. And we've got the best guy in the region as the chief here. And he's teaming up with Jeff Morrow, Jared Silverman, and you probably have seen Sidney Goldberg.
Yeah.
So we do have a fourth here on the staff. And between the three gentlemen there, you're talking about 60 years of TV broadcast experience, most of it in the community. So it's not even going to be a speed bump when I leave. So this isn't a matter of nobility. It's time to leave, and I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to drop the median age by 20 years and drop the median weight by at least 40 pounds. So I'm doing everybody out there a big favor.
This is not the last time we're going to have a conversation on this. Steve mentioned the podcast a little bit ago. Just wait, got some details coming about it. So we'll talk with Jay Moore. This is not goodbye. This is see you later. You guys have a great weekend. Try to stay cool.